Welcome, everyone. Before we start, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop a comment below. Also, tell me what kind of stories you'd love to hear. Stay tuned till the end. Story 1. I needed to get rid of my old SUV, an Isuzu Trooper that had seen better days. It still ran mostly, but it needed expensive repairs I couldn't afford. And even if I could, I needed something different, a truck bed, something practical. So I put up a Craigslist ad for $500, which I thought was fair. Within hours, my phone buzzed with a call from an unrecognized number. The voice on the other end was young but assertive, offering $200. I refused, stating I could sell the tires alone for that. A pause followed. Then the caller argued that I'd be left with a useless hunk of metal. I countered that I'd part it out or wait for the right buyer. The caller insisted no one would pay $500 and that I'd eventually settle for $200. I hung up. Immediately texts began, offering $250, then pressuring me to accept that amount, claiming the SUV wasn't worth $500. My old prepaid phone lacked a blocking feature, so I endured the barrage of messages. Days passed, and finally, a buyer agreed to $450. Just as relief settled in, another text arrived, offering $300. I replied that the SUV was sold, but the texter persisted, wanting to know the selling price and offering to beat it by $50. I refused again, but the texts continued. Finally, I revealed the $450 price, hoping it would end the harassment. Moments later, the texter offered $407. I frowned. I questioned the texter's earlier claim that the SUV wasn't worth more than $200. The reply was instant, claiming he was just trying to help me out, since I seemed like a nice kid. Something about the way he phrased it unsettled me. He was persistent, too persistent. The thought of him knowing my number, knowing I was selling something, made me uneasy. At some point, I would be alone in a parking lot, holding a title, waiting for a buyer to arrive. I told the texter I was turning off my phone after the sale, and to stop texting, I powered down my phone, not wanting to see another message. The next morning, I met the buyer in a busy supermarket parking lot. He was a normal guy, cash in hand, no haggling, no hassle. The transaction was quick, simple. But when I turned my phone back on hours later, my screen lit up with unread messages, asking where I met the buyer, his name, and offering $500 for the information. I never replied, but the thought still lingers. What was he really after? Story 2. I needed a car desperately. College was draining my savings, and I could not afford anything decent. So I scraped together what I had and bought an old Honda Accord for $2,000 from a used car dealer, one of those shady buy here, pay here places. It wasn't in great shape, but the dealer assured me It was solid. I knew better, but I had no choice. Months passed, and I landed a better job, saved up, and upgraded to something reliable. I no longer needed the Accord, so I listed it on Craigslist for $1,500, not looking to profit, just to get rid of it. Within hours, I received an email. I can give you a great cash offer after seeing the vehicle. The guy arrived that evening, and I recognized him immediately. It was the same dealer I had bought the car from. He circled the Accord like a vulture, tapping the hood, checking the tires, sighing dramatically. "I can do $100, he finally said. I blinked, reminding him he sold it to me for $2,000. He shrugged, claiming he would have to put money into it. I laughed, telling him I'd fixed everything myself. He repeated his $100 offer, and I refused. The next few days were full of the usual Craigslist crowd. Then the dealer called again, offering $400. I hesitated, but it was close to my asking price, and my potential buyer backed out. So the dealer returned with the money. We met at a bank, signed, and notarized the title, and the car was no longer mine. I stepped outside, relieved. I was finally free of that thing. As I walked toward my place, hunger gnawed at me, and I decided to grab food. That was when I saw him, a quarter-mile from my apartment. The dealer's car sat on the shoulder of the road. The Accord's taillights flickered. A second vehicle idled behind it. A fresh dent twisted the rear bumper. Someone had hit him at a stoplight. I slowed down. The damage looked minor, but the Accord was old, frail, the kind of car that insurance companies deem totaled over the slightest damage. I did not stop. I did not even look at him as I passed, but I did smile. Story 3. I needed a roommate fast. Bills were stacking up, and I couldn't afford to wait, so I put up an ad. A few days later, I got a response from a woman moving from Florida to San Diego. Over the phone, she seemed a little goofy, naive even, but harmless enough. Desperate to fill the empty room, I agreed to let her move in. The first week was a disaster. She had no sense of personal space, ate my food without asking, and used my laptop when I wasn't home. I came back one evening to find her in my room, casually scrolling through a dating site on my computer. If I had guests over, she would barge in and blurt out the most bizarre, unsettling things. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just eccentric, but something about her made me uneasy. Then she started bringing people over. She had taken up with a coworker from Subway, along with the coworker's boyfriend and a group of his friends, 6 people in total. I never saw them buy anything, but they always seemed to have beer, food, and whatever else they needed. She was the one footing the bill. They laughed at her, but she didn't seem to notice or care. She told me She left the window cracked because she lost her keys a lot. I do it all the time, she said. That should have been my first warning. One evening, I came home to an empty apartment. At first, I thought nothing of it. Then, I noticed what was missing. My TV, gone. My laptop, gone. The small TV from my room, gone. Even my aunt's wedding dress, which I had been trying to sell online, was gone. DVDs, prescription glasses, everything. I called her immediately, my hands shaking. She picked up on the third ring, sounding distracted. She was just getting home, she said. Then her voice hardened. I already called the cops, she said. Someone stole my laptop. And you know what? I think it was you. I was speechless. The cops arrived within the hour. One pulled me aside, his expression tired. She seems unstable, he muttered. I would suggest not using Craigslist for roommates anymore. I was still reeling when they let me back inside. She stood against the wall, arms crossed. I pointed at her, words spilling out before I could stop them. The cops walked in at that exact moment. I thought I was done for, but after talking to her for 5 minutes, they understood. They took a statement, logged what was stolen. That was all they could do. I took her key, packed her things in a single box, and left it outside the door. I got my stuff back on my own. I spread a rumor, said I had hidden cameras, that I wouldn't go to the cops if everything was returned. Somehow, it worked. I never saw her again. Story 4. My mother and stepfather have always been trusting people, ranchers who believed in handshakes and honest deals. When they got a new work truck, they listed their old one for sale. A woman from a rural town 4 hours away was interested, with countless excuses for why she couldn't meet halfway. My stepfather, kind to a fault, decided to drive the truck to her, with my mother, far more cautious, following in a second vehicle. From the moment they arrived, nothing felt right. The woman spun a story about a bank error, saying she could only pay with a post-dated check. She then asked my stepfather to leave the plates in his name. My mother, already uneasy, was now alarmed. She pulled him aside, voices low but sharp, and after a heated argument, convinced him to cancel the plates. But the check? He insisted on trusting her. They made the 4-hour drive back home, and as expected, when the date on the check arrived, the payment bounced. The woman dodged their calls for days. When she finally answered, she had a new excuse, something about being in the hospital, too sick to handle the issue. My stepfather, for once, stood firm. We are taking the truck back. Another 4-hour drive. This time, they brought a flatbed, just in case. When they arrived, the house was dark, and no one answered the door. But there, in a shed, was the truck. My stepfather worked quickly, loading it up, strapping it down. My mother, furious, couldn't let it go. While he secured the truck, she scribbled a note, sliding it under the door. Thanks for nothing. Hope you enjoyed wasting our time. 15 minutes into the drive home, the phone rang. The woman's voice, suddenly alive with energy, threatened to take the note to the police, claiming harassment. My mother didn't hesitate. You go right ahead, but while you are there, be sure to explain the fraudulent check you wrote. Silence. The line went dead. They never heard from her again. Story 5. My mother and stepfather have always believed in fairness and trust. But that belief was tested when they decided to sell their old work truck. A woman from a rural town 4 hours away expressed interest. She had endless excuses for why she could not meet halfway. My stepfather, generous to a fault, insisted on delivering the truck himself. My mother, skeptical from the start, followed in a second vehicle. The moment they arrived, something felt off. The woman greeted them with a frantic story about banking issues, waving a post-dated check as if it were perfectly normal. Then she made another request. Leave the plates in my stepfather's name. That was the moment my mother had enough. She pulled my stepfather aside, whispering harshly. After a heated argument, she convinced him to at least cancel the plates. But the check, he still believed in giving her the benefit of the doubt. They made the 4-hour trip back home, and just as my mother predicted, the check bounced. Repeated calls went unanswered. When the woman finally picked up, she had a brand new excuse, something about a sudden hospitalization. My stepfather, fed up, gave her an ultimatum. We are taking the truck back, another 4-hour drive. This time, they brought a flatbed in case anything had been stripped from the vehicle. When they arrived, the house was eerily quiet. No one answered the door, but in a shed, hidden away, sat the truck. My stepfather wasted no time loading it up, securing every strap. My mother, still seething, could not let it go. While he worked, she scribbled a note, slipping it under the door. Thanks for nothing. Hope you enjoyed wasting our time. 15 minutes into the drive home, the phone rang. The woman's voice, no longer weak and sickly, seethed with rage. She threatened to report the note as harassment. My mother did not hesitate. Go ahead, but you will have to explain the fraudulent check you wrote. Silence. Then the line went dead. They never heard from her again. Story 6. My girlfriend had been searching for an apartment for weeks, facing constant disappointments from Craigslist, overpriced dumps, sketchy landlords, and misleading listings had left her exhausted and frustrated. She was running out of options. One evening, she called me, her voice trembling. It was her last appointment of the week. She was alone on the steps of an apartment complex, waiting for the landlord. It was late, past 8:30 p.m. in mid-March, with long shadows and an eerie silence. 3 hours away, I could only listen. A car pulled up, headlights flashing. "I think this is him," she muttered. "I'll call you back." The last thing I heard before the call cut off was a man's voice saying, "You must be Rodeo Ruck's girlfriend." 20 minutes passed, then 30, 45, an hour. My fingers hovered over my phone. She had always called back within 20 minutes after other appointments. This time, nothing. Panic set in. I called, but there was no answer. Then it went straight to voicemail. I contacted her sisters, but no one had heard from her. An hour stretched into 2. I was about to call the police when my phone finally rang. "Stop calling me." Her voice was irritated. "I'm having a great conversation, and you keep interrupting." I was speechless. It turned out the meeting had gone so well that they signed the lease right then and there. 2 weeks later, she moved in. I have met the guy a few times since, and he seems great, but I still think about that night. And I wonder, why did he already know my name? Story 7. I had an extra pair of high-end headphones I no longer needed, so I listed them on Craigslist. Within minutes, a buyer responded. He seemed eager, too eager. His messages were polite at first, asking about the condition, whether I still had the box, if the sound quality was as good as the reviews claimed. Then his questions started shifting. "Are you the one selling them? You are a woman, right?" I hesitated before answering. I did not think much of it. Some people just like to know who they are dealing with, but something about his insistence made me uneasy. Still, I confirmed I was the seller. That seemed to satisfy him. We arranged a meeting for later that evening. Since my boyfriend was heading that way, I asked him to handle the exchange. A simple transaction. Hand over the headphones, take the cash. No reason to be concerned, but something was off. Hours later, my inbox exploded with emails from the buyer. "You violated our agreement. This was supposed to be a transaction between us. You deceived me." I stared at the screen, confused. What was he talking about? I skimmed through the increasingly frantic messages. He was furious because he had expected me to be there in person. A woman. It was not about the headphones. It was about me. The emails kept coming, growing more erratic. "You led me to believe we had an understanding. I feel betrayed. This is unacceptable. You need to make this right." Then his tone changed. He sent his home address, insisting I could fix things by visiting him. Come alone. That was enough. I told him I would contact the police if he reached out again. Then I blocked him. But he did not stop. He made new accounts, more emails, more accusations. You are ignoring me. You do not understand what you have done. We need to talk. My boyfriend had described him as normal, maybe a little twitchy, a little too eager, but nothing alarming. I cannot help but wonder what would have happened if I had gone instead, and I am grateful I will never have to find out. Story 7. I had an extra pair of high-end headphones I no longer needed, so I listed them on Craigslist. Within minutes, a buyer responded. He seemed eager, too eager. His messages were polite at first, asking about the condition, whether I still had the box, if the sound quality was as good as the reviews claimed. Then his questions started shifting. Are you the one selling them? You are a woman, right? I hesitated before answering. I did not think much of it. Some people just like to know who they are dealing with, but something about his insistence made me uneasy. Still, I confirmed I was the seller. That seemed to satisfy him. We arranged a meeting for later that evening. Since my boyfriend was heading that way, I asked him to handle the exchange. A simple transaction. Hand over the headphones, take the cash. No reason to be concerned, but something was off. Hours later, my inbox exploded with emails from the buyer. You violated our agreement. This was supposed to be a transaction between us. You deceived me. I stared at the screen, confused. What was he talking about? I skimmed through the increasingly frantic messages. He was furious because he had expected me to be there in person. A woman. It was not about the headphones, it was about me. The emails kept coming, growing more erratic. You led me to believe we had an understanding. I feel betrayed. This is unacceptable. You need to make this right. Then his tone changed. He sent his home address, insisting I could fix things by visiting him. Come alone. That was enough. I told him I would contact the police if he reached out again. Then I blocked him, but he did not stop. He made new accounts, more emails, more accusations. You are ignoring me. You do not understand what you have done. We need to talk. My boyfriend had described him as normal, maybe a little twitchy, a little too eager, but nothing alarming. I cannot help but wonder what would have happened if I had gone instead, and I am grateful I will never have to find out. Story 9. Selling my motorcycle seemed simple enough. I was heading off to college and needed it gone quickly. I listed it on Craigslist, expecting to haggle with lowballers and tire kickers. But then I got an offer for my full asking price. No negotiations, no questions. That should have been my first red flag. The buyer claimed he was out of state, but said his brother would pick up the bike and handle shipping. He asked if I could accept payment through PayPal. Something about it felt off, but I figured as long as the money was in my account before I handed over the keys, there was no harm in proceeding. Then things got strange. He messaged again, saying his brother did not have the funds to cover the shipping cost. "I will send you extra money in the PayPal transfer," he said. "You just need to forward it to the shipping company for me." That was red flag number 2. Soon after, I received an email from PayPal. It looked official at first glance, but something was wrong. It said the payment was on hold until I sent $1,200 to a third-party bank to verify I was a legitimate seller. Once I completed that, the money would supposedly be released into my account. I checked my PayPal balance. Nothing. I emailed the guy. "There is no money in my account. I am not sending anything. If this is a real transaction, you need to figure it out on your end." His response was frantic, almost desperate. "No, you have to send the money first. That is how it works. Please, help me out." I ignored him. Then, the worst part. I refreshed my Craigslist listing. Minutes later, a message popped up from the same guy. The exact same scam. The same script. Like our entire conversation had never happened. That is when I realized I was never talking to a real buyer, just a scammer, running the same routine over and over, hoping someone would take the bait. I deleted the emails, blocked the number, and reported the post. I never heard from him again, but I know he is still out there, sending the same messages, waiting for someone else to fall for it. Story 10. I was renovating my kitchen and replacing all the appliances. My old stove still worked perfectly, so rather than toss it, I decided to give it away for free on Craigslist to someone who genuinely needed it. Within hours, I had 104 responses. To keep things simple, I replied to the first 10 people, providing my phone number and restating that I wanted the stove to go to someone who truly needed it. One of the first callers was a woman who had just lost her job. She sounded emotional, relieved. Her own stove had stopped working, and she had no way to replace it. "This is such a blessing," she told me. "I can be there by 3 p.m. to pick it up." I emailed the other 9 people, letting them know the stove was spoken for, but that I would update them if it became available again. That was when the phone calls started. A man's voice came through the line, blunt and forceful. "Yeah, I'm coming to get that stove." I explained the situation, but he cut me off. His voice grew aggressive. "I have a right to that stove. You emailed me." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. A right to it? It was free. No one had a claim to it. Trying to stay polite, I asked if he intended to scrap it. His answer was instant. "That's what I do." That was all I needed to hear. "I'm sorry. But this stove is meant for someone in need, not for someone looking to make a quick buck. I told him I wanted to go to someone who will actually use it. His tone shifted from irritation to pure rage. His words slurred into a string of profanity, growing louder, more aggressive. I barely made out phrases like wasting my time and you'll regret this. I hung up before he could finish. At 3, the woman arrived with her teenage son. They were both polite, grateful. As they loaded the stove into their truck, I turned to the boy and smiled. "It's nice of you to help your mom." He shrugged, his expression tight. "Yeah, she's had a pretty bad few days." He repeated the story. Her job loss, their struggles. For them, this was more than just a stove. It was stability, hope, a way to keep their home running. I watched as they drove away, feeling relieved. But later that night, I kept thinking about the man on the phone, the way his voice had changed, the venom in his words. I checked the locks twice. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales that explore the mysterious intersections between our world and the unknown. Have you ever experienced an encounter that made you question the fabric of reality? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.